A very good morning to all our viewers today. Today we have with us one of the most prominent figures in the space of sustainability and CSR. He is the one who is responsible to make corporate India really responsible. He is the one who curated integrated reporting. He's a chairman emeritus of integrated reporting. He is also the chair emeritus of King's Committee on Corporate Governance in South Africa, which produced King 1, King 2, King 3, and and 4, and chair of Good Law Foundation. He is the chair emeritus of Value Reporting Foundation. He is also on the board of Global Reporting Indicators based out of Amsterdam. And presently, he's logging in from Sydney. He's also authored 6 books on governance, sustainability, and reporting, and the latest being The Healthy Company. Ladies and gentlemen, he needs no introduction in the space of CSR and sustainability. Let us all welcome Judge Mervyn King.
Thank you very much. Good to
Welcome on
be
our
with you,
show.
Russia.
It's an honor to have you on our show, sir. We are all privileged to see you. So, you have led most of your life in legal profession, and even now you sit as an arbitrator and mediator internationally. Now, what drove you in the space of sustainability, CSR, and responsible business leadership?
Well, yes, I had a successful legal career as a barrister, and I became a judge of the Supreme Court. Um, but for various reasons, I resigned my judicial appointment, and I had a big corporate legal practice, and many of my clients asked me to go on their boards as a non executive director. And then I became chairman of companies listed in London and Europe and in Southern Africa. And I also became the chair of the United Nations so called Eminent Persons Group on the question of governance and oversight of the United Nations agencies, which includes the World Health Organization, which is so much in the news these days. Took me about 3 years with colleagues working on reorganizing the governance of all those United Nations agencies. And it was there in the early, from the 20th into the 21st century, in the early part of the 21st century, that working with United Nations Community on Trade and Development and really learnt about sustainability issues and how critical they were. Also, at the time, it was noticed that on the great stock exchanges of the world, the market capitalization of these companies, only about generally 20% of the makeup of the market cap of these companies was represented in financial terms in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards, be they International Accounting Standards Board standards under the International Financial Reporting Standards Board in the Europe, or under FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board of the United States of America, because they're two main standards of financial reporting in the world. And the question was, we held it was IFAC that called for a meeting at the United Nations, where I was present in my various capacities, and the World Bank was there. IFAC was there, the International Federation of Accountants, and what we discussed was that there was no real guidance on how to report on this 80% of value, which were not reflected as additives in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards. And so, as you know, the Global Reporting Initiative was formed, and I became the chair of that. And we started looking at sustainability issues. and how to report on them and to give guidance. Now, at that time, following the Brundtland Commission of 1987, where the Brundtland Commission, the United Nations was terribly concerned with environmental degradation by the 1980s. So by that time, we already knew that the world, through the Industrial Revolution and the use of natural assets or the abuse of natural assets, there was environmental degradation. And the major user of natural assets was the limited liability company. And they were using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. So clearly not a sustainable matter. And the GRI looked at sustainability through a Brundtland lens, because what Brundtland reported, and I summarize a very detailed report, a few sentences, was that companies, limited liability companies, do not operate in an economic bubble. They operate in the triple context of the economy, society, and the environment, or as they put it, people, planet, and prosperity. And one has to look at all three of these things. And so the mindset started changing from the primacy of the shareholder, believing that directors should act to increase the wealth of shareholders. So when you increase the wealth at the top, it would trickle down to the impoverished at the bottom. Well, the trickle became treacle and it stuck at the top. It didn't come down to the impoverished at the bottom. And so it changed during the start of the 21st century to a value creation model. Was the business of a company actually creating value for society? That was the critical question. And the question was, how did the company make its product? How, in doing so, was it impacting on these three critical dimensions for sustainable development: the economy, society, and the environment? So also its product, when it left the factory floor, let's say, it had an impact on these three. So GRI looked at sustainability through how the company made its product and how its product, when it went out in society, impacted on these three dimensions for sustainable development. That was in the first decade of the 21st century. By the by the second decade of the 21st century, there were certain global events. There was the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and there was the GFC. These events started showing thought leadership in the ESG space, that there are events that could result in the economy, society, and the environment impacting on the company. So impacting on its financial condition, its balance sheet, impacting on its operating performance, its income statement, its cash flows, impacting on its risk profile, its cost of capital. So suddenly sustainability, like a coin, was seen to have two sides. And in 2019, at a speech I made in London, when we still met physically, I said it was a social outrage that there were many framework providers and standard setters in the ESG space, but they saw each other as competitors, and yet they were all dealing with the same issues, the same societal issues, and they were being funded for an outcome, namely to make reporting more informed so that accountability was more transparent. And I'm told that this speech, when I said it was a social outrage and they should collaborate, started galvanizing them to come together. But what really happened was the pandemic. The thought leaders in this ESG space saw how the scientists collaborated, and in 9 months instead of 9 years, they developed a vaccine. And so this prompted the leaders in the ESG space, and I include the GRI, the IIRC, Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board, the CDSB, Carbon Sustainability Standards Board. They all issued a statement of intent that they would collaborate. This resulted in the merger of SASB and the IIRC into the VRF, the Value Reporting Foundation. And the Value Reporting Foundation has now taken its sustainability standards of reporting and it's been consolidated into the International Sustainability Standards Board, which will be finalized by June of this year by the International Financial Reporting Standards Board. And they have acquired the IR framework of the IIRC. And that will be used as the connection between the financial. So in India, you report financially under the IASB standards. I assume that your authorities will collaborate and have standards for sustainability reporting, which could be one of two things. What has happened is that in the European Union, they have legislation about by 2035, no more combustion engine motor cars, for example. So they developed sustainability standards called corporate sustainability reporting directives. And they incorporate both sides of the coin. So, how the company makes its money and its product impacting on the three dimensions, and how the three dimensions impact on the company into those reporting directives. The ISSB will focus on looking at how those three critical dimensions impact on the company, but accepting that the company will always have things to report which are material to stakeholders about how the company makes its product and its product, how that impacts on those three dimensions. And the word interoperability has been coined. And of course, you will then report under the GRI standards. And all this will be connected through an IR framework, which is the skills of the IIRC have been acquired into the IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards. So a complex answer to your question, but that's where we are globally at the moment. And sustainability, of course, I became concerned about it because it was critical as a chairman of companies, large companies listed in London, Europe, and South Africa, that we actually spoke about value, and value includes your sustainability issues and your financial issues. So we had to connect them. And integrated reporting, the first country in the world to develop it was South Africa through my efforts. And then we formed internationally, it was Prince Charles's A4S Accounting for Sustainability, the GRI, we got together. And at St. James's Palace in 2010, the IIRC was formed.
Wonderful. And we all should thank you for gifting us with IIRC and the framework that has been created by you under your leadership and that the world is following. Thank you for making that happen. Now, although many companies are adhering to IIRC and GRI, but many of them are lagging. How do you see that we could bridge this gap? And also in terms of knowledge, how can we bridge the gap of knowledge as well as implementation to ensure that all the companies are adhering to the standards?
Well, what is happening globally now is that countries that follow the IASB on financial reporting, such as India, will, I believe, follow the ISSB standards, International Sustainability Standards Board standard, under the International Financial Reporting Standards Board. So I believe your authorities will mandate the sustainability reporting of ISSB and to include anything that involves the other side of the sustainability coin, the impacts of a product on those three critical dimensions as well, and then connecting them, integrating them in the report. So I, they're being mandated in the EU. It's being mandated under the IFRS. So 144 countries, which includes India, which report under the IFRS, will follow. I think your authorities will accept they should follow the principle of mandating that sustainability reporting, and then the board applying its mind to take out the material matter defined as that which is having significant impact on value and put it in clear, concise, and understandable language, not in ISB speak or ISSB speak or IFRS speak, but in clear language that people can understand. Because when you think about financial capital, the providers of financial capital, it's people walking in the streets of Hyderabad, Mumbai, etc., who deposit their money with institutions. And those institutions and pension funds invest in equities on the Bombay Stock Exchange. And so people need to understand what is happening with their money. And I believe if you report in 99 out of 100 people don't understand the financial report. And well, that to me is not reporting, because you've got to report so they understand and can actually appreciate, what is happening with their money, because it is their money. It's not the pension fund's money. It's not the financial institutions' money. So that's why we say in the IR framework that you need to do this in clear, concise, and understandable language.
Absolutely. So, following that question, and I would like to mention that all of us and most of the companies who are generating reports, they are doing a fine job. But many a times we do observe that there is a lag in implementation. Although the reports are wonderful, but there is a lag in implementation and the social monitoring system. Do you foresee that that could be a part or that could be included in the coming times?
Yes. I think social media is playing its role. That if a company is not really creating value and really it's creating a bottom line, which really is being subsidized by society and all the environment, well, social media, people in society start seeing these things, and social media gets reported. And companies actually get banned. I mean, effectively, they won't buy their product. They will actually go out of business. So social media is playing a huge role in the lag between the report and the actual implementation. And people call it greenwashing. I call it green wishing, wishing this and wishing that. And it's actually slowing down, and implementation is happening. Why? Because the mindset of the providers of capital has changed as well. They are investing in companies that are creating value for society, because those are the companies that are going to survive long term. If the board doesn't get that collective mind right, well, that company is not going to survive in this society that looks at things through a magnifying glass all the time.
Sure. And so, as you were earlier mentioning about collaboration of non-financial reports and the financial reports in the coming decade, what do you see would be the trend for ESG and other similar non-financial reports that would surface?
Well, it's reflected in the makeup of market cap, as I've already said to you. If you look at the Bombay Stock Exchange, if you look at the Tata Group, for example, I know the Tata very well. And I, I think it's a fantastic company. And this is a company that its founders thought through the trust that was formed and everything for the benefit of society. I had the privilege of, at the Bombay Stock Exchange, to award to, I've just forgotten his first name, the person who's now in charge of the Tata Group, but not the father or the grandfather, but the young man now. But anyway, he arrived in a white Range Rover. You know, they've acquired Range Rover and Jaguar. And I went up and I bestowed on him, on behalf of the Bombay Stock Exchange, a Life Achievement Award. And when we had finished, the news media said, "Will you go downstairs to the Bombay Stock Exchange? If you've been in Harsha, you will know there's a bull and a bear at the entrance. And Professor King, will you hold one horn of the bull? And Mr. Tata, will you hold the other horn, and we'll take a picture for the newspaper?" So he said, "Okay," and I said, "Okay." I went downstairs, and to my amazement, there were about 2,000 people had gathered outside. They had heard that he was in the building at the Bombay Stock Exchange. And they started shouting, "Tata, Tata, Tata." It was a chilling experience for me, you know, that the respect for here was a man who really was respected by society in India. And why? Because they run their company on the basis that it has to be creating value for society and not just for a particular stakeholder, as we all did, uh, increasing the wealth of the shareholder, but in most instances subsidized by society and the environment. That's why we see the degradation of the environment. We see climate change. We see everything. Nature is taking its revenge. That's exactly what is happening. Look at the unseasonal rains in India. Look what's happened recently in India, the floods, the flooding. So the world is not what it used to be, and we have to think about it.
Thank you for sharing such a beautiful memory. It has definitely carved an itch in our mind. So IICSR is a dedicated institute developing responsible business leaders in India and across the globe. What kind of courses? Firstly, yes, we would love to collaborate and work towards spreading the knowledge of IIRC and GRI. What are the other kind of courses that you see that we should intervene in?
Okay, I realized that some directors don't understand that the company is an incapacitated, artificial, legal person. So it's like an infant. By definition, it can't do anything wrong. When something goes wrong, the company is always innocent because it has no mind, heart, soul, or conscience. When something goes wrong, it's the failure or the wrongdoing of its corporate leaders, have erred, have made a mistake. So the question is, how do we educate young people who are studying um, corporate science, MBAs, chartered accountants, corporate law? How do we educate them to come out to be conscious corporate leaders, to understand that they are the conscience of the company? But when something goes wrong, they are to blame, not the company. The wrath of society must turn against them, not against this innocent company, because it's an innocent, incapacitated person. So, with this thought in mind, and with the SDGs, SDG 4 is about quality education, and SDG 17 is about collaboration. Now, because of my work with all these international bodies, and I still advise the World Bank on corporate governance, for example, um, I know all these international institutions. They know me, and I know all these leaders in all these bodies. So I thought of establishing the Good Governance Academy, which I did 2.5 years ago, which Carolyn Chalmers is the chief executive, and I will connect you and her. And the idea was to make sure that we had at least 2 colloquia a year, and these colloquiums would be on critical governance issues. And we would have members. I have, for example, IOD India. I've got IOD United Kingdom. I've got the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. I've got the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. That's 560 members. I've got all of them as members, and their members get a copy and get the video of these presentations. And so they get the messages about conscious corporate leadership. And I was telling you before we started that the one we had in November this year, which was, I titled it "Corporate Reporting is Not What It Used to Be." It was hailed as the best corporate event of the year. And it went to 5 million accountants and directors in 135 countries. So that's what I want to do. I'll connect the Good Governance Academy to your organization, the IICSR. You've got 10,000 members. So we've got our next one is on the 19th of May, and it's about connecting the financial to the non-financial. And I've got speakers already lined up. The chairman of the International Federation of Accountants, the chair of the Technical Readiness Working Group on the International Financial Reporting Standards, Veronica Poole, will be speaking. So I've got these international speakers speaking about this connectivity, and huge amount of learning will come out of that for people. And you'll get it, and you'll get an invitation to invite your 10,000 members to attend the colloquium without charge, and they will hear. And if they don't hear it, then you go onto our community portal and you can see the videos. Or you look at the summary that Carolyn and I do at the end of each colloquium. We summarize what each of these major thought leaders have spoken about, and you distribute that to your members. And so we are getting this information going around the world. But it's very important to understand that a company is an incapacitated person, that the conscience is the conscience of its corporate leaders. And if you're not thinking in a conscious manner and you're not creating value for society, you shouldn't exist because you're actually being subsidized by society. So the man in the street is subsidizing the company. And that's not the purpose of the company. If you go back to the middle of the 19th century, when the limited liability concept was formed, it was formed to help create jobs and to raise capital. That's what it was. And it has, in my opinion, through the 20th century been abused because it was used and people believed the purpose was to increase the wealth of shareholders. So it would be absurd, for example, if I said to you, the purpose of a company is to increase the wealth of workers. Well, the company would go out of business. So we've heard, and capitalism has changed completely. So you've got this financial capitalism which failed, increasing the wealth of shareholders, and today you've got this sustainable capitalism. I mean, it is. It's a capitalism where it's appreciated. You have to create value. And if you're not creating value, well, then you shouldn't be in existence. And
Thank you.
and the outcomes, everything is outcomes based. So reporting is outcomes based. What are the outcomes? You should actually be telling your stakeholders what are the outcomes of what you've been doing. The SDGs are outcomes-based: quality education, clean water, clean production. These are all outcomes. And so you should be thinking strategically about outcomes. What are the outcomes of your business? And
Thank you so much. I would like to invite a very special guest who actually connected us. I would like to invite Dr. Michael Hopkins on the show. So,
hello,
here
Michael.
we have two pioneers of the industry coming together.
How are you, Michael?
Hey, Mervyn, what a lovely surprise to see you. And looking so well, young man. Now you're smiling. You were so serious just now. You look absolutely lovely. And it was so lovely hearing you after all these years, my friend, really. And I'm glad Harsh is still there. She's doing magnificent work, Mervyn.
Thank you.
Anyway, let me get onto a little bit of substance. Funny enough, last night I was with a group of 13 leaders. I'm actually in Kenya, in Nairobi, and I'm actually in my hotel room. But last night of the 13 leaders, we were all talking about the business case and what was the moment of your own personal transformation. So it was very personal, and so I started off. And of course, you have to start off with the word "I," and I know you don't like to do that so much, and not me really, actually. So I would also like to ask you that question. If have we got time? I hope Harsh will give us some time. The moment of your personal transformation. Now that's one. And now second, I have been listening to you, and the Good Governance Academy, excellent, fantastic. And I see one of the members last night, by the way, was the leader of the IOD here in Kenya. So let's get that group together with you. That would be magnificent. I think they'd like that very much. And well, you started talking. My third point. You started talking about value. And I wondered, as you were talking about all these standards, I've always been nervous about them. What you see as the business case? I mean, you mentioned a little bit the SDGs, but when you do these standards, is there a chapter on the business case? How do you make money? Thanks, Mervyn. And I know you're going to speak for about 20 minutes brilliantly, and I'm going to listen back and enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, what was my transformation? So I've had 3 lives. I've had my legal career where I was, thank God, successful as a barrister. I became a QC and I became a judge. And for very personal reasons and reasons of conscience, I resigned my judicial appointment. And as I said earlier, I had a huge corporate practice. And so many of my clients asked me to go on their boards as a non-executive director. And then I became the chief executive of some companies. And I wasn't happy with what I saw, what was happening. That this focus on increasing the wealth of shareholders, to me, was absolutely cockeyed. I mean, how do you take one particular stakeholder and give them primacy in an organization? And if you look at the history of the formation of the company, what happened was that wealthy families provided capital to organizations to start businesses. But when that business failed, the wealthy family was left with the creditors and the employees to pay them. And so they started saying, we're not going to give capital anymore for new businesses. So the leaders of the day said, well, we have to think of something. And so Lord Gladstone and various other thought leaders in the UK and in Massachusetts in the US said, well, why don't we, the representative of the people, the government, why don't we create an artificial person who has limited liability so that you put up £1,000 each for which you get a share certificate. So you have 10 shareholders with £1,000 each, which would have been an enormous amount of money in those days, in the middle of the 19th century, £10,000. And that's the limit of your liability. But the concomitant of it is that when and if the business fails, You, Mr. Shareholder, are at the back of the queue. The creditors get paid first, the employees get paid, and if there's a surplus, you will get something. But the protection for you is that it's almost like risk capital, but you have limited liability. Now, what happened was that the corporate architecture, which pertains still today, was that the shareholders appoint the directors. Well, the shareholders were these members of wealthy families. Inevitably, they appointed members of their family. This resulted in employees seeing the shareholders as the owners of the company. Now, if I said I owned Michael Hopkins, you'd be horrified. And in fact, the ownership of persons became illegal when slavery was abolished. And yet, throughout the 20th century, we had this myth that shareholders were the owners of the company. It was one of the drivers of the primacy of the shareholder. It was an absolute myth. A shareholder, when we still had still registers, couldn't walk into a company, put his or her hand into the till and remove a £5 note and put it in his pocket. It's a theft. You couldn't use the company's assets over a weekend. It's an abuse of property. So there was a complete misunderstanding of the whole concept of the company. The company was created to raise capital by way of share certificates, which today is electronic, of course, and to create employment, not to increase the wealth of the shareholders. It was a societal thing, and everybody lost sight of that because the shareholder was seen to be the owner. And when that myth broke, and it took Michael tears, sweat, and many debates at Harvard, Cambridge, at Oxford, and to get, and the late Professor Sloan was her name. She died 2-3 years ago, did a fantastic job at Harvard and Cornell University. And Lynn Payne at Harvard also, great job. She wrote a fantastic article on the era of corporate leaders in the 20th century. And one of the errors she said was the belief that you had to increase the wealth of shareholders. And the myth actually did break. I think what helped break it eventually, well, it was broken, certainly was broken with Lehman Brothers and the GFC. I mean, it just, we saw, and by the turn into the 21st century, certainly we knew through the computer age we could do research more quickly, that the makeup of the market cap of companies, something had happened. Because from the 70s, when 80%, 90% of the company, the market value of the company, the number of shares in issue times the market price, was reflected as additives in a balance sheet, suddenly it was the other way around. 80% of the market value of a company wasn't reflected in a balance sheet. This was deeply concerning to IFAC, the International Federation, and they called that meeting, which I spoke about earlier, at the United Nations. And so we started developing standards on sustainability reporting. And we've got to the stage today where I believe there should be a global comprehensive corporate reporting system. And there's, unfortunately, the EU has got a legal constraint because they've got these timelines by 35 no more combustion engines, by 2040, whatever it is, no more fossil fuels to drive energy in companies producing products. So they did their corporate reporting sustainability directives, which combined both sides of that sustainability coin, which I've tried to describe to you. And the IFRS has formed the ISSB, which they announced at Glasgow at the COP meeting, and it will be finalized in June of this year. And they will be focused at looking at how the economy, society, and the environment impact on a company's financial condition, its balance sheet, its operating performance, its income statement, its cash flow, and its risk profile, its cost of capital, but accepting that the way the company makes its product, and when the product goes out into society, such as I always give the example of a great company, Coca-Cola, when people started saying in America, without any proof to this very day, the reason for the obesity of our children is Coca-Cola. Well, Mexico slapped a tax on Coca-Cola. South Africa slapped a tax on sodas. I mean, but to this day, there's no evidence of it. But it showed that media has a huge role to play in all this. So we cannot, as I said at the United Nations, one cannot have companies reporting financial report and a sustainability report, because that's divorced from reality. You and I, Michael, as directors of a company, don't operate like that. The company operates, these things are integrated 24/7. We don't, I always give the musical analogy. You don't, in playing a symphony, have a clarinet playing in one room, a piano in another, violin in another room. No, these are all together. And that's exactly what happens in working. You don't separate out the use of water with how the machines are working. These things are all integrated 24/7. Hence the concept of integrated thinking and integrated reporting, which has become critical in the whole world. And so I wrote my book in 2016, Chief Value Officer, where I said, and IFAC have agreed with me, that in fact the chief financial officer has become a misnomer, because an accountant today who just sits in his or her corner office drafting a financial statement according to financial reporting standards is in fact not doing his or her job, because they're the steward of business information. So they are the true change maker in the C-suite. They've got an understanding of these of thinking on a basis of value creation, that profession. And I'm delighted and proud to say that my alma mater, we've started a postgraduate CVO course. Audencia, one of the oldest business schools in the world in France, has got a CVO course. And throughout the world, they're now teaching young accountants, and accountants are learning it on the job, as it were, about thinking about value creation and not just thinking about making sure, as Pacioli did, that there was a balance between the debit and the credits. Well, Pacioli, of course, is still the basis of financial reporting, but corporate reporting has changed completely. It's integrated. So a long answer to your question, Michael, and I suppose one of my proudest moments is that as chair of the GRI and Prince Charles as the patron of Accounting for Sustainability, and Sir Michael Pete of Pete Marwick fame was then the chair of A4S. We agreed that we had to form another body, and Prince Charles very graciously agreed to form it at St. James's Palace, which we did in 2010, the International Integrated Reporting Council. And that was formed, and we did a framework to assist people in actually reporting and bringing the financial and the non-financial together. So one could see the true value of a company operating.
Mervyn, it was a fantastic answer to my question, and I learned a lot with that and everything that you said. I remember my own run-in, it must have been 20 years ago, with Lehman Brothers, but I'll tell you that story if we've got time. But let me allow other people, and there are many there in Harsha's group, who would love, I'm sure, to ask you questions. But I'm so impressed that you're now Sir. When are you going to be Lord, Sir? Good luck, Mervyn. I hope our paths cross sometime in the future. But
Thanks,
certainly
Michael.
think about the IOD in Kenya, and let me get talking to them.
I think Paul Clements Hunt is now in Nairobi as well. Paul,
Oh,
you know
okay.
him?
Yeah,
From
I
UN.
don't think. Yeah, I don't think he was there last night, but I don't know him personally. But I can reach out.
Michael, please send me an email. I mean, my email address is very easy. It's Mervyn at Mervyn King, one word, .co.za, all lowercase.
Got it.
And Harsha, send me an email and I will get Carolyn or I will communicate with you for the Good Governance Academy to link with the IRD Kenya and put you in as a member, and we'll get all the benefits you'll see from it, and it won't cost you anything.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mervyn. Thanks, Harsha. And travel well, stay safe, and stay. You haven't changed, mate, since I last saw you. What was it? 10, 15 years? You haven't changed it. Keep going, man. Keep going.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hopkins, for the wonderful question. May I request Mr. Johnny Talreja, who's one of our students of Executive Masters in CSR and Sustainability, to please ask his question, sir.
Yes, sir. Hi, sir. Sir, first of all, congratulations for such a wonderful collaboration of SASB and IIRC. And good to know that we will have a common standards by June 2022. Sir, being a student, actually, I have question related to how about strengthening the quantitative parameters. For example, sir, nowadays, people say in terms of work culture, we have got great place to work award. We are doing soft skills training for the employees. We are opening gyms for the employees. But ultimately, there are companies, they are having an attrition rate of more than 80%, 50%, 30%. Specifically in sales, they are having an attrition of more than 90% as well. So while on the other hand, uh, it is good to say that we are doing many things for the employees, but ultimately the measurement how my whether my employees are happy or not is the attrition rate. So sir, so my question to you would be, uh, while collaboration is also good, how about bringing more such quantitative parameters in the standards? Please, if you can elaborate on, sir.
Okay, I think I'm right in saying that listed companies in India, 2%, I think it is, of their bottom line has to be set aside for good deeds, I'm going to call it. That doesn't make a company a responsible corporate citizen. Of course, as chairman, I can say to you, Johnny, go and open a school over there for X amount of rupees, which is 2%. But we carry on how we make our money, which is actually uh, aggravating the bad way in which we make our product, impacting on the environment, for example. The critical thing is, how does the company make its money? That's the critical issue. So you can have quantitative measurements all you like, but you've got to look at how does the company make its money, and what are the impacts it's having on those three critical dimensions: society, the economy, and the environment. You cannot look at it anymore. If let's say in 1920, Johnny, you and I started a factory making shirts in India, in let's say in Mumbai. We would started right on the banks of a river. Why? Because the water we needed was right there, and our waste, discharge it into the river. It was easy. It was cheap, and also the expenditure was less, and our bottom line improved. But over the years, look what harm we've done. So today, the world looks and society looks, and the more important thing is that the large providers of capital, such as BlackRock, Kelpers, the Norwegian Oil Fund, are looking at how does this company make its money. When companies in India today issue a bond, for example, with a particular coupon, which goes out into the capital markets to raise billions of rupees, let's say, they don't do only a financial due diligence. They do an ESG due diligence. And it's not a question of compliance on a quantitative basis. It's a question of how did this company make its money? And how are these directors actually thinking? Do they think on a long-term basis? Are they thinking? Are they understanding the needs, interests, and expectations of their stakeholders, but then make a decision in the long-term best interest of the health of the company? Now, in the nature of things, from time to time, that will benefit one stakeholder above another. But if you continuously make that decision, the long-term health of the company, that's when you really get value creation. So it's a question of the long-term health of the company that has to be asked.
Thank you, sir.
Masha, I can't hear you.
Thank you, sir, for answering the question so patiently. Thank you, Johnny, for the question.
Thank you.
We have a question from one of our from the audience. He says that while we are seeing the Western world has awakened due to exponential increase in natural disasters, rest of the world is grappling with the urgency of action devoid of it. Lack of financial support, limited access to technology, and immature policy and implementation framework is derailing the actions. What would be your advice and expert comment on the same?
Well, that's why at the COP meeting in Glasgow a few months ago, it was agreed that many of the Western countries have had their time in the sun, have had their time to create wealth, but they did it in a manner where they degraded the environment. They were abusive society generally, and they've made their money. So they must subsidize companies in developing countries that are changing to be more sustainable, because they haven't had the years of the luxury of the successful Western companies. So there's actually an agreement and arrangement at COP. How it's going to be done, it's not clear to me. But countries such as South Africa, for example, my country, will be subsidized in changing over and using less coal for power, for example. So there will be subsidization made by wealthy Western countries such as France, United Kingdom, etc.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time that you have given us, and to all our viewers. Some of the comments that we received from our viewers was, company has no mind and no heart, which is so true, from Mr. Prasoon Kumar on YouTube. And one of them was from Mr. Suresh Gaur, who's also thanking you. So we highly appreciate the time and knowledge that you have shared with us and with all our viewers. And we wish all the upcoming endeavors all the luck, and we wish to work together hand in hand and spread the word on sustainability and CSR across the globe with our strengths.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you.
Bye-bye.